Yeah, hi people. Marino with again as always under as usual. Yeah, I'm gonna cast someone else's chart as is pretty much obvious or evident based on the top left corner. Instead of Alexander, yesterday it was Alexander, today it's going to be Spartacus, also one of my favorite warriors. Now, the same thing that I said with the Alexander video applies. Spartacus was born in BC times, you can see that here. When was Spartacus born? Date of birth 103 BC. One modern author estimates that Spartacus was around 30 years old at the time he started his revolt, which would put his birth year around 103 BC. He was born in Thrace. Thrace is, an ambiguous area in the sense that it's a historical and geographical region in southeastern Europe, and it's split amongst the nations of Bulgaria, Greece, and Turkey. And it just goes on from there. Now, so yeah, obviously I can't input Spartacus's date of birth, time of birth, and location of birth. Those are non-applicable. He was born too long ago. He was born in ancient times. So I'm simply doing the same thing that I did with Alexander. I work my magic, literally and figuratively, and voila. So yeah, let's get right and down to it. Now, Spartacus, when he was born, the ascendant was 28 degrees in Cancer. When he was born, the moon, both the regular moon and the black moon, so Lilith, were both in Leo, like perfectly conjunct each other, separated only by minutes and not even separated by degrees, both 9 degrees in Leo. This stands for the fact that Spartacus's mother, and well as his wife, provided he was married, was of vital importance to him in his life. It essentially encompassed a good deal of his life. So his life for a good portion.
God, man.
Yeah, ignore that. His life for a good portion revolved around, in case you heard that you got mail notification, just ignore it. Okay, Spartacus's life revolved for a good deal around, hold on. Yeah, his life for a good deal revolved around the woman he loved, which as a boy was his mother, and as an adult, his wife essentially, or the woman that he was with romantically and he had children with. And that's what the regular moon indicates. And it also indicates that he was emotionally quite stable and strong. And Lilith indicates that his wife was a hidden source of strength for him, as in he saw his wife as his rock, essentially. And you'll see how important that is later. So yeah, his wife was of vital importance to him. Let's just say whenever he lacked, he was in a deep pickle, he was in really deep trouble or big trouble, he was in a pickle, all he had to do was think about his wife and he would essentially be renewed with vigor. He would essentially immediately be revitalized with strength. Think about someone you truly love and think about that person being harmed, and you will want to walk to the ends of the earth to exact your vengeance. That's the kind of guy Spartacus is. I also don't need to highlight any examples. I'm saying that right now. As usual, you can find his Wikipedia article linked in the description of this video. And if you don't feel like reading, I would recommend that you watch the Spartacus series by Stars. I will also link that in the description to where you can watch it for free. This is something that encompasses seasons. It's a Spartacus series. So prepare yourself for, a lot of sitcom time. Okay, you're gonna have to watch all the seasons from beginning to end. I don't know, I forgot, I think there were like 6 or 7 seasons, but believe me, it's worth it. Still one of my favorite sitcoms up to present day. Just amazing, delicious. Spartacus. Now, the South Node, which is going retrograde in Scorpio in the 4th house, which stands for the fact that Spartacus essentially was determined and hell-bent on essentially preserving his way of life in relation to domestic affairs and in relation to being a patriot, essentially honoring his homeland, despite the fact that that adversely essentially was a source of, generally speaking, the source of his death, his demise. Now, or he came close to being the source of his demise. Now, the North Node is in Taurus, going retrograde, which stands for, it's going retrograde in Taurus in the 10th house, which stands for the fact that Spartacus, generally speaking, would have been better off essentially just taking things the stable way and doing things in a non-hostile fashion. I'll get to that more later, but you'll see. It's also not a coincidence that the south node is down here, and north node is all the way up there. Now, the pot of fortune is in Scorpio, and it's conjunct the 5th house, which is ruled by Sagittarius. The pot of fortune in Scorpio here stands for the fact that Spartacus' level of determination in terms of preserving his so-called homeland and all the things that he loves and that make him him. And it's also trine the ascendant, strong, very strong thingy, very strong positive aspect. This is essentially his guiding strength. This is his strongest trait, his level of determination and his unwillingness to give up in the face of adversity. And the fact that it's conjunct the 5th house in Sagittarius stands for the fact that it stands for the fact that he is, that Spartacus also had a way with people, specifically people of a foreign background, people that were foreign to him, okay, people that were non-native to his location, and all the things that made him him, essentially strangers in the finest sense of the word. And yeah, what can I say? What else can I say? He was successful in being a diplomatic statesman in terms of speculating with people to the point where they essentially followed him and they were essentially loyal to him. Let's just put it that way. And now here it begins. Okay, we have got Pluto in Aquarius here in the 7th house. Pluto in Aquarius in the 7th house stands for the fact that Spartacus was a great leader. He was someone that was capable of influencing the masses that he led, regardless of what he led them to and how he led them, to the point where he developed strong bonds and relationships with them. And he had an outstanding personality in the sense of being an authoritative figure, as in having the strength to lead, being a born leader. But this is a double-edged knife or a double-edged sword, because be that as it may, Pluto is opposed the ascendant, and Pluto is conjunct the descendant, which is in Capricorn. Now, this stands for the fact that Spartacus, essentially around the half part of his life, that's why Pluto is exactly here, encompassing half the chart, stands for the fact that essentially Spartacus let's just say halfway throughout his life, or let's just say Spartacus lived until he was 60 years old. This essentially happened when he was 30, or the following that I'm about to say happened when he was 30. So halfway through his life, or throughout his life, when his life reached its halfway point, he was essentially enslaved by a foreign power. We all know who that foreign power was. People that are familiar with history, at least, was the Romans. And that's what Pluto also represents. That's why Pluto is opposed the ascendant. Pluto opposition the ascendant essentially stands in this case for being subjugated, being enslaved, essentially, to do the bidding of a higher power, essentially a stronger enemy or a stronger foe. And Pluto being so strong stands for a tremendously strong foe, and that is authoritative in nature. That's why Pluto is conjunct the descendant, which is in Capricorn. The 7th house essentially represents Rome, you know, his captors Rome, and those that enslaved him to do their bidding. And last but not least, the fact that Pluto is in Aquarius stands for the fact that for those times, the Romans were technologically advanced in terms of warfare and overall quality of life and living standards, from a neutral perspective, compared to especially those that they subjugated. Those that they subjugated were seen as savages, essentially. This degree, I know this degree by memory, 0 degrees in Aquarius, it stands for elevation. But since it's opposed the ascendant, it stands for the exact opposite. What's the opposite of elevation? Exactly, subjugation. Spartacus was subjugated by the Romans. He was the only one. That's why Pluto, that's what I was going to say. Last but not least, that's why Pluto is also in Aquarius. Aquarius also, other than what I already said, Aquarius represents the masses. So it represents essentially Spartacus merely being one out of many slaves that the Rome subjugated, or one out of many people, many tribes, many groups of people, towns, villages, you name it. Many foreign civilizations that they subjugated, or people from foreign civilizations, for the purposes of being submissive unto them. So translated to within the context of those times, around the time that Spartacus was born and he lived, it stands for slavery. Now, Spartacus's mother, obviously, like I said in the beginning, represented the moon, and the moon was in Leo, so his mother was someone that, generally speaking, loved children. She was a sassy woman, very flamboyant and whatnot. And yeah, Spartacus also inherited a couple of these traits, and he was also a lover of children, wanted to raise his children well, etc., etc. Just being a good father overall. And Spartacus's father was represented by Saturn in general. The mother is represented by the moon, and Saturn is represented by. The father is represented by Saturn. Saturn is in Pisces, which is already not good, and it's in the 8th house. Saturn in Pisces essentially stands for negative mental instability, in one word. Mental instability, mental illness, you name it. Essentially being so stressed that you develop these mundane mental disorders like neurosis and just overall stress, okay? Having a borderline mental breakdown, you name it, erratic behavior, it just goes on. And the fact that Saturn is in the 8th house stands for the fact that Spartacus's father was someone that was most likely afraid of death. He was fearful of death. Saturn is also negatively aspected to Mars, which is 3 degrees in Cancer, conjunct the 12th house, and conjunct the 12th house as well as in the 12th house. Which this is a positive aspect, but generally speaking, it stands for the fact that Spartacus, his father, most likely was someone that dealt with money. Think of a loan shark, or think of a debt collector from those times, from ancient times. Someone that dealt with money, or a tax collector, or anything that has to do with money that is to be owned, or that is to be collected through third parties or from third parties. And that's also why Saturn, despite the fact that it's so afflicted, it's in a bad sign as well as in a bad house. Not too bad. The sign is worse than the house. Thingy is Saturn is not the best in Scorpio, but also not the absolute worst. But Pisces, Saturn does not do well in Pisces at all. It's substantially afflicted in Pisces. It's substantially weakened in Pisces. Now, Saturn being conjunct the 8th house, which is ruled by Aquarius, this is a strong conjunction. Which stands for the fact, like I said, Spartacus's father is someone that dealt, generally speaking, with the public. He was someone similar to a debt collector from ancient times, something like that, like a BC bookkeeper. Think about that, or a BC a BC loan shark, or the assistant of a loan shark, or the kind of guy that has to collect stuff from people on behalf of the loan shark. It just goes on, okay? Or he was a tax collector or similar, you name it. In any case, he fulfilled a similar position, and that was also most likely his undoing in terms of him dying. The trine here with an afflicted Mars, like I said, does not function well in Cancer at all. It stands for emotional instability and frustration due to not being able to cope with the situation, and as a result, throwing some emotional temper tantrum. Let's just say emotional rage. It's the best way to describe it. And that's why Mars is in thingy, in the 12th house. It stands essentially for undoing, imprisonment, being held captive. It just goes on. So essentially, Spartacus, his father, was most likely, he did something wrong and he was thrown in a dungeon to rot as a result, and that's how he died. Those are the conditions and circumstances under which he died. And yeah, from his father, Spartacus also inherited a good deal of these things. Specifically, what he inherited is his fatalistic attitude. Spartacus had a tendency to be a hothead. That's also what both Saturn and Mars say, especially when he is confined or restricted, let alone incarcerated or imprisoned, which he was, of course, as a slave by the Romans or by the Roman Empire. And as a result, he threw these like adult male rage temper tantrums due to emotional frustrations. It's like a caged animal that will literally smash against bars in a vain attempt to wrestle itself free from its so-called chains and its level of imprisonment. And that's why, and of course, that did not do any favor for Spartacus. It only made him seem like a wild animal that can't be tamed and can't be trusted, that is not willing to be obedient and subservient. And that's also why Saturn is square the pot of fortune. 2 degrees from Pisces to 26 in Scorpio. It's square. It's negatively aspected by 6 degrees. 2 degrees in Pisces to 2 degrees in Sagittarius is a perfect square, 90 degrees. But the pot of fortune is 6 degrees away from that, so it is 96 degrees away. In any case, it's square. A square is a heavy negative aspect. It's one of these red lines that you're seeing here. Okay, it stands for friction. Okay, Spartacus, his fatalistic attitude and his level of coerciveness due to emotional instability and frustration, did the opposite. It didn't do any favors for him. It did the opposite. It essentially landed him in deeper and hotter waters, so to speak. It only dug the grave deeper for him. Moving on. In any case, you've got Neptune in Pisces, which is conjunct the 9th house, also in Pisces, very strong. And it is trine, positively aspect to the pot of fortune, and also trine the ascendant. And all of them are connected. That's that giant triangle that you're seeing here. This in astrology is called a grand trine. A grand trine is an excellent symbol of success. It essentially stands for all of these forces and all of these characteristics harmoniously coexisting and working with each other to produce devastating levels of success in whatever area. Give me a second, people. Hold on. Yeah, sorry, just had to take care of a WhatsApp message. Yeah, in any case, moving on. Yeah, so Neptune here, grand trine Neptune at its absolute strongest in Pisces conjunct here stands for the fact that Spartacus had an excellent level of intuition, a well-developed level of intuition, okay, has prophetic dreams and stuff like that. That's why it's in the house of Scorpio. Neptune in Pisces simply means strong psychic abilities. Neptune in Scorpio's house stands for also excellent psychic abilities, but specifically getting things like dreams about how he's going to die, prophecies about what's going to happen to him. And it just goes on and on and on. When you read up about Spartacus, you'll see how correct that is, of course. And it's conjunct the 9th house. It stands for the fact that Spartacus essentially used his well-developed level of intuition and spiritually measuring and gauging people to essentially, again, be a good statesman, to win them over to his way of thinking. That's the best way to put it. To essentially use his well-developed level of intuition to converse with people and to actually learn their traits and habits and deal in overall foreign trade and level of diplomacy to the point where things almost always work out in his favor. Almost always, not always, but generally speaking, they work out well. So they work out in his favor. This degree even is very positive. This 25 degrees in Pisces stands for extremism. It stands for the fact that Spartacus did have a tendency sometimes to be a little extreme, but not in a negative way so much. And the conjunction, the 28 degrees in Pisces, essentially stands for being able to overcome an obstacle. So yeah, Neptune is at its absolute strongest, just an absolute powerhouse. The only drawback, though, is that Neptune is also square Mars, which generally speaking stands for the fact that he sometimes has again, it's the same thing that Saturn square Mars said. He had the tendency to be thingy. He had the tendency to be aggressive sometimes, and that also deals in due to emotional frustrations. Essentially, when he doesn't get his way, he tries to trade with someone and someone told him, no, listen, we don't like this. Then yeah, usually, let's just say that the aggressive guy in him came out a little due to emotional frustrations. Like a child not being able to get what they want, a spoiled child, and then they throw a temper tantrum. Obviously, not that Spartacus was spoiled. I'm simply giving an example. Now, this is what Spartacus is most well known for most people that are familiar with history. You have the Sun, Chiron, Jupiter, and Mercury all in Aries, all next to each other. Remember what I said in the Alexander video. When you see a cluster of planets also close to each other, it stands usually for an exceptional individual. An individual that doesn't have to be well known, but he will have an exceptional personality. This is despite the fact that the Sun is conjunct Chiron and Jupiter, but not conjunct Mercury. Mercury is too far away. Conjunction simply means that they're so close to each other to the point where it's less than 8 degrees. So yeah, Jupiter is 9 degrees away, but it still counts as a conjunction because when you look at everything in detail, it's like 8 degrees and a couple of minutes. So it still counts as a conjunction. Well, conjunction is simply also a very good aspect. It stands for forces working in close proximity to each other. So the one manifests through the other, like characteristics that essentially hold hands together, and the one complements the other, and both of them are a strength of guidance, or a source of strength and guidance for each other. Yeah. And Mercury is conjunct Jupiter and Chiron and midheaven. Now, let's begin. The Sun, ridiculously strong here. The Sun is in Aries in Sagittarius' house. The Sun is strong in all fire signs. So the Sun is already in a strong fire sign, zodiacally speaking. And to top it all off, the Sun is in a fire signs house. And not just that, even the degree is complementary. 10 degrees in Aries, I know this degree. This degree is a giant source of success. It's a giant indicator. Sorry, a very strong indicator of success. It's a strong indicator of success, okay? This is essentially, the key word here is victory, 10 degrees in Aries. It stands for someone that has a high probability of succeeding regardless of the undertaking that he undertakes, or regardless of the venture he undertakes. So you can immediately tell the Aries essentially stands for warfare. It stands for violence, doing things the violent way. And the Sun being here in the 9th house stands essentially for being on foreign soil. The 9th and the 10th house stands for being on foreign soil. Okay, everything that happens past the point of Pluto purely stands for what's happening after, what happened to Spartacus in his life after he was captured by the Romans. And the Sun essentially indicates Spartacus's natural ability to be able to be a well-skilled and well-talented fighter, a well-rounded fighter that could take on his enemy, which in this case, his foreign enemy was the Romans. And tremendous levels of successes he accomplished. That's why Spartacus handed the Romans their asses to them so many times before his army was finally subdued. Now, Chiron here, not the best in Aries. It's like a little afflicted in Aries. Not too badly, but also not too great. Is in Aries, 15 degrees in Aries, indicates that Spartacus also had a knack for teaching people how to engage in warfare, specifically his style, so Spartacus style. Jupiter in Aries stands for the fact that Spartacus also had a large following. Okay, he had a lot of followers that essentially followed after him and learned his craft when it came to warfare, and went to war with him against their hated enemy, the Romans. And again, it's nothing but good stuff, honestly, nothing but good stuff. An abundance for skill and devastating martial prowess from Spartacus, as well as those that he passed that martial prowess on to, resulted in stunning victory after victory for him. That's why Spartacus was so successful, and that's why his name is spoken of the present day. Now, moving on to Mercury. Mercury is definitely not well. Does definitely not do well in Aries, but it's at least conjunct those two, and it's conjunct midheaven. Now, Mercury in Aries stands for the fact that Spartacus was someone that had a tendency to be forceful, especially this degree. I recognize this degree. 24 in Aries stands for wantonness. Wanton, W-A-N-T-O-N, simply stands for being coercive. So Spartacus, essentially, his mindset was, do as I say. That's what he demanded from his subjects, those that followed him into battle. He demanded obedience from them in every imaginable way, especially when it comes to battle tactics and diplomacy and doing things his way. That's why Mercury is in the 9th house. This degree, even the 0 degrees that midheaven is in Taurus, the key word here is demanding. This degree simply stands for someone that is demanding. And Mercury does function well in Taurus, I want to say. It functions moderately well in Taurus. It's a double-edged knife or sword. It functions well in Taurus in the sense that it essentially is it's someone that is essentially stable in terms of mentality. So Spartacus was stable in mentality, but at the same time, in his thought processes, but at the same time, he was coercive and demanding in the aforementioned, like I said, in terms of, hey, we do things my way regarding diplomacy and battle tactics and doing trade and doing this and do that. You know, you'll fall to command, you'll do as I say. Typical general aspect, like a drill sergeant general aspect that had that essentially could put his foot down and say, we're doing it because I said so. Yeah, that's these are the traits that Spartacus had, and these are the planets that are and the placements that are responsible for that. I already discussed the north node. The north node, I'm going to treat it again. The north node in this case, I already explained what the south node means earlier. The north node, in addition to what I already said in the beginning, it also stands for the fact that Spartacus has honestly his focus on essentially regaining what he lost. So his homeland, Thrace, and his domestic life with his wife and everything that he lost, his entire life, everything that made him him. That his focus on this was already excessive, and that he should have focused more on essentially, after being enslaved by the Romans, essentially regaining his freedom in a docile manner, essentially either winning his freedom or buying his freedom or similar. In any case, doing things, it's a reference to the saying, catching bees with honey. You catch more bees with honey than with vinegar, or you catch bees more easily with honey than with vinegar. But in Spartacus's case, he did things the hard way, and yeah, we all know how things ended out. Those that are familiar with history, at least. And of course, don't forget, this cluster also stands for, again, his martial prowess, including in gladiatorial combat. That's also why the pot of fortune, like I explained earlier, in addition to what I already said, is conjunct the fifth house. The fifth house, and that's why the fifth house is also ruled by Sagittarius. It essentially stands for, again, other than what I already said earlier around the beginning of this video, it stands for the tremendous successes Spartacus had as a gladiator. Okay, gladiators back then, they were a source of entertainment, similar to sports entertainment like boxing nowadays. And it was done on foreign soil for the amusement and entertainment of foreign public. That's why the fifth house rules Sagittarius. The fifth house deals with all of these things: entertainment, sports, everything. So you see how literally everything is so well connected and so dead on and so accurate, as always with me. And let me see. That's also why the sun is almost trying the fifth house. It's only off by 1 degree or by minutes. It stands for the fact that Spartacus was a good gladiator, but he was not the best. He was a good gladiator, but he was not the best. He was one of the best, but he wasn't the best. If it had been trine, well connected to the fifth house, then he would have been the best. Especially if it was a perfect trine, like the fifth house was ruled by 10 degrees in Sagittarius rather than 1 degree. Now, Venus and Uranus in the 10th house in Taurus. Venus in Taurus in the 10th house stands for the fact that Spartacus was, generally speaking, a charming ruler. He had a good deal of charm about him, those that followed him, those that he resided over in terms of his army that he used to revolt or stage his revolts, those that plain and simply followed him in his cause. He was charming, and he could essentially win them over to his way of thinking by essentially bringing up the importance of camaraderie and the importance of sticking together, and essentially many people, instead of being individual fingers combined, being one strong fist that can deal blow after blow to anyone, in this case Rome being their enemy. That's what it stands for. People in the past have heard me explain that Venus in Taurus deals with money, etc. Yeah, it all depends on the situation, but in this case, Taurus does not represent money. Taurus represents income and material resources and stuff like that in general, but not in this case, because a lot of people overlook the fact that Taurus in general, the ruler of the second house, also deals with allies. It deals with people that are on your side, regardless of the subject matter at hand. People that literally are quote unquote on your side, people that vie for you, people that are literally allies, ALLY. So yeah, he simply taught them the importance of camaraderie, and that's how charming he was, or that's where his natural charm and charisma came into play, as in, hey, hold the person next to you, their hand, buddy system, okay, being there for each other in good as well as bad times, okay, we're at our strongest. Together, separated we're weak, but together we stand strong. That whole notion. Now, Uranus in Taurus is afflicted, and both these planets do not do well in this house. Okay, Venus does not do well in the house that Capricorn rules over, which is this house, obviously, the 10th house. Venus is weak in this house. It essentially stands for someone that has difficulty being charming due to an amount of coldness, being cold up to a certain extent. And yes, Spartacus was that. Spartacus had to be ruthless, but at the same time, he could also be charming. He wasn't emotionless. So Venus is doing not too badly here, okay? Venus is okay. But Uranus is in an afflicted sign in an afflicted house, which stands for the fact that the things that Spartacus taught people, the whole notion of camaraderie, was prone to falling apart at the drop of a hat. So if only the slightest amount of pressure was exerted upon Spartacus's army, they had a tendency to bicker and squabble amongst each other when they came under pressure, to the point where they essentially would just completely collapse. All the cohesion that Spartacus had built up with them, and all that talk about unity and camaraderie essentially fell apart under not the slightest amount of pressure, but under a substantial or a noticeable amount of pressure. Anything from minor to mild, so moderate pressure, which obviously was true to people that are familiar with Spartacus. At least Uranus isn't doing too badly based on the fact that it's conjunct Venus. It would be even worse if it was if it was separated from Venus, it wasn't even conjunct Venus, would be really worse. In any case, yeah, moving on, last but not least, you have Mars in Cancer in the 12th house. Mars is in a weak sign and in a weak house. Mars does not function well in water signs in general, with the exception of Scorpio. Mars is strong in Capricorn as well, and that's why Capricorn opposes Cancer. So Mars is weak in Cancer. People that have Mars in Cancer in general are people that are hotheads. They're people that essentially throw fits, hissy fits, and temper tantrums and become angry due to emotional frustration, and that was the case with Spartacus. And the fact that it's in the 12th house stands for in which part of his life he displayed this negative trait. The 12th house, one of the things it stands for is imprisonment in captivity. That's why Mars is literally the last thing in this chart. It essentially stands for the fact that Spartacus died under violent conditions. He didn't literally die in battle necessarily, but he died under those conditions or circumstances, okay? He died carrying out war or going to war with his enemies or being at war with his enemies. And that's what Mars in the 12th house stands for. And that's a source of self-undoing. And specifically regarding his personality trait, yeah, the Mars in Cancer in the 12th house simply means that Spartacus was a hothead, like I already said earlier with Saturn. Spartacus essentially imprisonment and being held captive and being confined to any kind of situation or circumstance or physical location or similar essentially made him emotionally frustrated, or it caused him to become emotionally frustrated, and as a result he fumed and he essentially he threw hissy fits like an adult, and he essentially raged. Think of someone being in a room and then smashing stuff left and right because they can't, quote unquote, take it anymore. That's what Spartacus was like. That's one of his character traits. And of course, just like I already said with other factors, it's also a source of undoing for Spartacus. It essentially made his captors, the Romans, see him as a wild beast that's too difficult to be tamed and would be better off being put down rather than someone that, does things willingly. And that's also what the North Node says. Spartacus would have had an easier chance winning back his freedom if he accepted things the way they were, that, hey, he was overtaken by a stronger enemy, there's nothing you can do about it, and he focused on regaining his freedom within the context of his captor, so by Roman guidelines. So essentially winning his freedom back or regaining his freedom through conventional means rather than actually doing things the forceful way. But yeah, based on everything that I explained and everything that you can see for yourself, the entire chart screams that this is someone that is ultra difficult, in a good way, of course. Someone that literally will not stand for anything, and in his case, it had its benefits and drawbacks, but the benefits outweigh the drawbacks. That's also why the weaker planets are slightly overshadowed by the stronger planets. Neptune at its absolute strongest, Pluto at its absolute strongest, the part of fortune there, and the Sun at its strongest, not literally its strongest, but a ridiculously strong Sun and a strong Venus. Yeah, they they overshadow the negativities. The negativities would be Pluto's opposition to here, to the ascendant, Saturn, weak Saturn, and a weak Mars, and a weak Uranus, and a weak Mercury. The good still outweighs the bad, not by a lot, but like 70 to 30% essentially, or 75 to 25% to be more precise. Yeah, before I go, last but not least, the Sun is also trine the Moon and Lilith. Remember what I said in the beginning. Spartacus, essentially one of the driving forces for him as well. One of the driving forces for Spartacus as well was again the thought alone of his wife and his family and how much he loved them and cherished them and cared for them. It essentially folded. It gave him strength multifold. It essentially turned him into Superman, borderline Superman. That's all, guys. See you guys later. Bye.